If the Pelicans have Trey Murphy and Brandon Ingram on the team at the start of the regular season, is that a problem? Can they even do that within the salary cap and Trey's looming extension? I'll tell you why it's actually a good thing for the Pels to have both players on the roster in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Tuesday. The show is going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week. We'll be back to 5 days a week, about a month from now as we gear up towards media day then. Preseason for the Pelicans, training camp, all that. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait for basketball to be back because we're in a black hole of it now that the Olympics are over. And we'll talk about the Olympics and two lessons that I want you to take away from it in the third segment of today's show. We'll talk about Jordan Hawkins as maybe the Pelicans' secret weapon in the second segment. But I want to start off with Ingram and Trey Murphy, and does one impact the other? Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So I put out the call for questions on Twitter. Of course, by the way, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. Become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. I always keep putting out the call for questions on Locked On Pelicans, and I want to answer a couple that kind of came up in most recently. Tomorrow, I want to look at Willie Green a little bit because he's going to tie into the next segment here. But the first question was, can the Pelicans keep Ingram and Trey Murphy if they give Murphy an extension this offseason? So the short answer of this is yes. Right? If you just want the nuts and bolts of it, the answer to that question is yes, because any extension that Trey Murphy gets, say tomorrow, it doesn't kick in until the next season. So any extension he gets will be not this year, but the next year. So this year, let me pull up his current contract and what he's due to make. That number isn't going to change in any capacity. They've got him pretty cheaply. He's going to make this coming year a little over $5 million. After that, it will jump, but he's in the final year of his deal. It was a team option. It's been picked up. It doesn't really change anything for the salary cap this year if they give Murphy a new extension. Look, he's going to be angling for big money. They're going to negotiate on all of this, but expect 4 years between $130 to $160 million. Somewhere in that range is likely what it would end up being, which I think is going to end up being a steal for a player of his caliber that can develop, more on the develop part here in a second, in the future. So no, if he signs an extension and Ingram doesn't get traded, no big deal, right? Even if Ingram ends up also signing an extension, you have both those guys making big money. Anytime I've talked about the Pelicans salary cap for the future, I've kind of anticipated Trey Murphy making $20 to $30 million per year into all of that. And that's why, when you look at what needs to happen if Trey signs an extension and if Ingram signs an extension, it's likely going to be that you need to trade CJ McCollum after this season. Now, maybe they need to look into doing that sooner rather than later. And if you can make a move for him this year just due to the financials, it wouldn't be, a bad idea, I'd say. But they're not in any sort of rush. They're barely over the luxury tax right now, $1.6 million. Trey signing an extension doesn't impact that number. And in fact, I will say this, if you keep Ingram on the roster this whole year, have Trey sign that extension, I think that's a good thing. I think the team wants Trey Murphy to be a starter. I think him as a starter fits really well next to Zion Williamson, and we probably want to see him become a starter eventually, this season, next season, sooner rather than later. But there are, no offense to Trey, some limitations to his game still, right? We know he is a shooter. We know that his rebounding has improved. He has all the tools to be a good defender, but his skill set is still very different than Brandon Ingram right now. Ingram is a creator, can kind of create for himself too. And Trey, so he creates for others and himself. Trey hasn't developed those skills just yet. And I think he's capable of it. But we've also seen Trey that, he's not just a spot-up shooter because we've seen him more of an off-the-dribble game from him. We know he can dunk, being robbed from a dunk contest title a couple of years ago. But beyond dunking and shooting threes, you've seen a little bit of an in-between game. You saw more of a mid-range pull-up jumper off the dribble because one of the things that you saw teams do to him is if he drove off of a closeout, he's in the corner, and he gets the ball in the closeout to try and contest that three, he can move off the dribble, yes, but when someone were to rotate over and try and kind of take away that drive to the rim, he was forced just to dunk over them pretty hard, I think. And doesn't have a move to get around those guys. Not that he would have a Euro step or a crossover, something like that. Doesn't have that in his bag just yet. So when I look at Trey and think about Trey and what, we'd like to see him potentially develop, we know he's working and training this offseason. That kind of off the dribble game, I think is big and important for him to do. If you thrust him into a Brandon Ingram kind of role, he doesn't have that just yet. Making teams pay for doubling Zion Williamson, oh yes. Being a threat from super deep, which I think is super important. Those 30-footers that he can take and make are really great. That's an extra element of spacing that, not tons of other guys on this roster really provide. Really no one other than him. You've got to guard him. And at his size, that three-pointer is pretty tough to block, to guard, to contest. When he adds a little bit more to his game, he's going to be good. The rebounding we saw improve, we expect that to keep improving. The defense will definitely come and be there. And going into this season is when you want to really see that take a step forward and should see that take a step forward. But it's the in-between game, the moves in his bag, the ball handling is what we want to see. With Ingram still on the roster and whether Trey's coming off the bench or starting, he doesn't need to fill that role just yet. You're not putting him in position to fail or to not succeed because you're not asking him to do too much. And when you see that happen, that's not great for younger players. Trey is going to be a starter and earn big money in this league and be a borderline all-star, in my opinion, with the scoring ability that he has. That's going to take him far. We don't need to speed it up too much just yet. You figure that once CJ is gone from this roster, traded, whatever it might be, and then Ingram is likely not going to be here beyond this season. He might stay this season. We'll figure it out kind of after next season. But I think that's when you kind of look at Trey in that first year of that big extension being the starter on this roster. Now, I know he just wants to help the team win, and he's not focused on that right now, which I think is a great thing. So let him develop his game, and he's going to be ready in a year when I think the leap is to be expected from him from like solid guy off the bench, borderline starter to key player for your team alongside Zion Williamson, DeJounte Murray, who seem to kind of be the core guys going forward, Herb Jones as well. So I'm excited to see what he's going to do this season in a more expanded role, certainly whether it's as a starter or off the bench, but no need to kind of thrust him into something that he's not there yet. And you have the option to kind of bring him along slowly, let natural progression take hold and not force it. That I think is only going to be a good thing long-term for his career. So coming up next, let's talk about another young guy on the Pelicans. Do you agree or disagree with Trey? Do you want to see him in the starting lineup this year? Do you want to see him off the bench? Do you think he can kind of be the guy that's a six-man off the bench that like leads the team, right? Can he be that go-to scorer, the guy that creates his own, is the guy with a second unit? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Let's talk about another young player because I saw something on an article that I thought was interesting about Jordan Hawkins. Let's break it down. Is he a secret weapon for the Pelicans this coming season? That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by my favorite eBay Motors. You noticed the weather in New Orleans the other day was like kind of cool on Saturday morning, Sunday morning. Weren't really expecting all of that. And that meant I could take the Corvette out, and that was awesome. That Corvette is running. It's nearly 50 years old, running beautifully, even in the heat, because of the radiator that I got off eBay Motors and put into that car. So eBay Motors is my go-to for anything car related. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has you covered. And I go there because with over 122 million parts for your vehicle, your daily driver, that's a current car, a classic car that you're fixing up, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. With the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. If that radiator didn't fit in or didn't connect and I'd put it in that engine bay, oh goodness, would I have been furious. Fit perfectly. And I ordered it there because with eBay Motors, the prices are great. You're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the prices you need at all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to keep your car on the road. Keep your vehicle alive over at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the Number One Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen today, the Locked On Saints podcast. We've got a preseason game in the books. Spencer Rattler, Jake Haener. Can anyone challenge Derek Carr, who I don't particularly love for the starting job? Ross Jackson, Locked On Saints. Make them your second listen. He's breaking down everything you want to know. Also, what's going on with Penning? Is the offensive line going to be a problem? Ross Jackson's going to make sense of it with everything black and gold. Make the Locked On Saints podcast your second listen today. So over at BleacherReport.com, they ran an article that I thought was pretty great, and it was the secret weapon on every team. And look, when you talk about secret weapon, it's not Zion, it's not Murray, it's not CJ, it's not Ingram. It could be Herb Jones, could be Trey Murphy. They picked for the team Jordan Hawkins. So it's kind of like an unsung guy that's kind of flying under the radar a little bit for each team. They picked Jordan Hawkins. And one of the things that they really talked about in that article that I thought was great was how the Pelicans, made him that draft pick, 14 overall, and used him as a movement shooter around Zion. And it's the perfect role for him. And you can run so many different things. And with the offense, maybe expected to take a step forward with DeJounte Murray, where, okay, you have someone orchestrating a proper pick and roll, and you can run guys off ball through different screens. And they broke down the different ways that Jordan Hawkins was used minimally, in my opinion, last season. They had him do kind of pick and pop ghost screens where he comes and sets a screen but doesn't really, and kind of breaks away from that before Zion comes over with the ball and flares out to get an open three-point look. And we've seen New Orleans run plays like that with Zion Williamson. It's basically an inverted pick and roll where the guard sets the screen for the big man. And with Zion drawing so much attention, and if you let him get a full head of steam coming off that pick, no one is stopping him at the rim. Teams really kind of key in on Zion to slow him down and leave a shooter open. They did this a ton. Zion's, first year with JJ Redick on the team. They ran it kind of on the wing, the side of, right around the three-point line break. You could do that more with Jordan Hawkins, right? Being a movement shooter, he's really elite at that sort of thing. You can run a lot of off-ball movement for him to spring him open and get a good look, and he's a willing cutter. He's got a high motor. He can do that catch, turn, shoot, real quick release. Call him the secret weapon for that. I agree that he can be, but here's the question. Is he going to get enough playing time to do that? Now, I don't want to say this roster is stacked in like these guys at the end of the roster aren't going to get minutes. I think Hawkins right now, especially with the departure of, Dyson Daniels, Najee Marshall, steps into a bigger role, just almost by default because, you need bodies and you need people to play. So I think that he is in line for a bigger role and could be the secret weapon. But it's going to come down to not him on offense. It's going to come down to him defensively. If he can up his defensive game, he will get minutes and he will be on the court. We'll talk more about Willie Green in tomorrow's show. But certainly that is going to be the biggest factor to him being a secret weapon, right? You want to play for Willie Green. You want to be on the court. Maybe this is to Willie Green's detriment. We'll talk about it. You got to play defense. Now, when we looked at Hawkins in Summer League, I had a couple of people, I was on the radio here in New Orleans talking to some folks. I've seen some other people say it too. Weren't really impressed with his showing in Summer League, and we're kind of concerned about it. And I'm not. In Summer League, he was playing point guard, running the offense in a way that he did not do last year. That he's just not, that's not going to be his role at the NBA. And in Summer League, you're given the freedom to experiment, to try different things. And I like that he was willing to do that. If you wanted to use him off ball, run another point guard out there and let him just kind of play his role in the NBA, that's fine. He would have succeeded at that. He would have shot better. Off ball guy versus an on ball guy. But he didn't. And they experimented with him and tried to get him out of his comfort zone and learn new skills and apply new skills in, a real time flow of a game. I think that's a good thing. So his struggles in Summer League don't make me worried about the role that he would play at the NBA level or, in next season on this team because it's different. Defensively, I thought he did a pretty good job in summer league. Now he should, right? He's got good size. Yeah, I think that gets forgotten. We think of him as a two guard, as a movement shooter, and you kind of think smaller, but he has pretty good size at 6'5", and definitely plays bigger than that, plays bigger than we kind of realize. He's been a slightly better rebounder than I expected, and that's a great thing. And that means he can have some of the defensive tools. At times he did look lost out there. You expect that from a rookie picked at the end of the lottery. Rookies usually, unless you're just Herb Jones, and an incredible player and all of that, aren't really good defensive players their first couple of years in the league. And I think that can be okay, right? By the way, Hawkins last year had a better defensive rebounding percentage, smaller sample size, than Herb Jones. Think about that for a minute here. He was 3%, a little bit less than that, behind Dyson Daniels, who we think of as a good rebounder and who has a size advantage as well. He has the tools to be a good defensive player, I think, or at least above average. Good might be a little bit of a stretch. But if he can play defense, he can be a secret weapon on offense, right? You've got to do more than just be a movement shooter if you want to play on this team and if you want to help this team win. That's why I think Trey Murphy is likely a bigger secret weapon, but he might be kind of a big enough name, well-known enough player on the scouting report now that maybe he doesn't really count like that. I don't know who else would be the secret weapon at that point then for the New Orleans Pelicans based on, what the roster is going to look like next season. So maybe it just by default is Jordan Hawkins if you're kind of trying to pick young guy flying under the radar. But Hawkins definitely has the potential. And if they kind of have DeJounte Murray as the point guard, go more point Zion too, and maybe a little less point forward with Ingram, you can really run some very creative things. This is one of the reasons why I'm very optimistic about this Pelicans team this season. I think they can be very, very good if they improve offensively like we're expecting them to do. And I don't even think it takes much, right? We know they're going to be good defensively. Even without a center, Jonas Valanciunas was not a good defensive center. And they were a good defense. That doesn't really change with Daniel Tice or some of the other players out there on the court. They were the 11th best offense last season. That can improve. And I think that if you get a little bit more balance there and it helps you close games out because they were bad in clutch situations, 14 and 15 last season, improve that by 3 games, 5 games. 5 might be a lot, but 3 is doable. That really changes things dramatically and changes what this team can look like. And when you're going to have to stagger some of your guys just to find the right minutes and roles for them, Hawkins fits in with Zion and kind of a unit focused around him and his talents, maybe with more shooting. This is a good problem for the New Orleans Pelicans to have. And I think he could be in place for a big expanded role. He'll hit his threes. We know he'll hit his threes. And he'll be fighting for more minutes with Jose Alvarado. Defensively, Jose kind of won out as the season went on when it looked like Jose was going to be out of the rotation after that game against Dallas where Jordan Hawkins popped off and won the game essentially. We'll see if that continues. He's going to be in line for a big role, but Willie Green's going to have a quick leash. We'll talk more about Willie Green in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. If you got thoughts or comments or questions about Willie Green, let me know in the comments down below. So coming up next, Team USA won the gold medal, but there's 2 things I want to point out from the Olympics that are tangentially, let's call it, related to the New Orleans Pelicans. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the Number One Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. This week, the show's going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. No live show this week, doing some traveling, then kind of back to usual. We'll probably keep doing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Seem to like that, just kind of jam-pack the middle of the week for y'all. Give you that Friday off. We'll be back to 5 days a week before you know it at Media Day, doing everything. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I cannot wait. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides the daily basketball analysis from national and local experts that you want in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm on there every Wednesday. I co-host our national show on Wednesday, which is a pretty cool thing. New Orleans on the big stage here. So please subscribe, or at least listen every Wednesday. You don't need to be an everydayer of Locked On NBA, but become like an every Wednesday-er. That worked. We can go with that. So let's touch on the Olympics here. Team USA winning the gold medal, like, as expected. I'm not going to do, the, like, which players from the Pelicans could be on there. It's kind of obvious who could. Though I think you could easily make a case for Trey Murphy, but especially Herb Jones, too, on the next iteration of it, if you need that, like, defensive stopper a la Derek White, kind of Drew Holiday in that role. But one of the questions someone asked on here was, you looked at the level of talent in the Olympics, and it wasn't always easy for Team USA. And what does that mean? Does that mean there's someone the Pelicans should sign? The problem with the Pelicans signing anyone is they're starting to run out of roster spots. They're in the luxury tax. And, like, as great as Yabusele looked for France, like, no, that's, like, not worth paying the luxury tax for a guy that's not going to get minutes, right? Who did you see out there who's not in the NBA that would get minutes over the players on this roster? And I don't think there is one, so don't go deeper into the luxury tax for that guy. Go in for a difference maker, in my opinion. But what I think it does show is the NBA is heading in the right direction. And I said NBA, not like FIBA, not World Basketball. The best players play in the NBA. There's probably like a handful, maybe 5 guys that are playing overseas that belong in the NBA, should be in the NBA, but aren't right now. There are maybe guys that, like, could make it, but there's, when you say, like, this dude should be in the best league, right? We're not getting into the Noah Lyles comment and all of that, but, like, it's the best league. Whoever wins the title in the NBA is the best team. You don't need them to play anyone else. They would smoke them. Otherwise, those players would be in the NBA, and it's pretty much that simple. So, there's just no one that I think they should sign. But when you look at how competitive some of these national teams were, look at Serbia having a lead over Team USA, it, mainly comes down to Jokic, but France was hyper competitive, I thought. Canada was disappointing, but there's a ton of talent there. The NBA is more global than I think we even realize with the amount of players. I've been covering the league, this team, for about 15 years now. I'm getting old. I'm dating myself. But, when I first started, the big conversation was, would there be contraction in the NBA? There's 30 teams. Should there be 28? There just wasn't enough, like, top-end talent, enough talent in the NBA to fill out rosters. You had some real bad players at the end of rosters. And you still get that a little bit now. But we're talking expansion because there's so much talent that it wouldn't make the product, the games, worse. You have enough talented players in the world to fill 2 more rosters. That's 30 more people that you could say belong in the NBA. And I agree with that. 15 years ago, I don't think that was the case. Like, contraction made sense. Hopefully, I didn't want them to do it because New Orleans likely would have been one of the teams cut. And they were never truly going to do that. But you had a good argument to be made that there wasn't enough, like, high-end NBA level talent. Now, when you watch, the Olympics, the FIBA World Cup, Germany being so dominant, right? There's more than enough talent to really kind of be around 32 teams. And I think that's a really good and healthy thing for this sport. It thrives on good players, star players, guys being competitive. There's a lot of talent here, and I think that's a really, really good position for the NBA to be in. A couple of years ago, it was Team USA in, like, Spain, right? And that was really the other team. Argentina's win is, like, super incredible and impressive, and, like, should count more for Manu Ginobili and his, like, legacy as a basketball player than it probably gets counted for, in my opinion. But that's neither here nor there. I think that's my big takeaway from the Olympics was, man, the NBA is going to be in great shape because all these guys are playing there, right? Like, that's kind of the big takeaway I had. The other thing that I thought was interesting was Jason Tatum not really getting minutes and run in the Olympics with Steve Kerr, kind of doing to him, and someone mentioned this to me, of what happened to Brandon Ingram, but I don't think it's really the same thing. They gave Brandon Ingram the chance and he didn't work for it, and they just never gave Tatum the chance. It wasn't like he failed. They were also just winning games, so why mess with it too much? And I think that was part of the factor with Jason Tatum. John Corrales, my co-host on Locked On NBA on Wednesdays, who covers the Celtics, hosts Locked On Celtics, writes for Boston Sports Journal, Business Journal, something like that. I forget exactly what it is. I feel bad. Sorry, John. And his thing was like, yeah, it doesn't matter that Jason Tatum didn't play, right? It doesn't matter at all. Doesn't say much about him as a player. if you go and play and fail, that's different. But if you don't play at all, we know how good Jason Tatum is, and he's got his world championship ring with the Boston Celtics to prove it. So I don't think it's the exact same situation thing that's equatable to Brandon Ingram. So I don't want to look at this and be like, oh, it was Steve Kerr's fault why Ingram played poorly in Team USA. No, it was on Ingram playing poorly. And also, look, not having the right role for him, but given the team that you had, you weren't going to put Ingram in that role, and he needed to kind of adjust and be more of a team player, and he struggled with that. We'll see what happens with Ingram this year. It's a talented player, and I just recorded with Lyle Swithenbank on his new podcast that'll be out soon, and we were talking about Ingram, and Ingram's a really good player. Like, I do think some of the pendulum has swung a little too far on the negativity towards him, but he's got to fit in with the team a little bit more to kind of be his best version and have there be winning basketball. Different than Jason Tatum's situation, in my opinion, entirely different than what you saw with Team USA at the Olympics this past summer. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know what you think about the talent level in the NBA. I think there's more than enough to support two teams. You could even convince me of four, though I think that might be pushing it a little bit, and you dilute it a little too much. But two more teams, absolutely. We'll see what expansion looks like. Likely Vegas and Seattle, though, which means one team, only one, is going to the East, and that'll be not the New Orleans Pelicans, in my opinion. We already did that show if you're an everydayer. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate y'all so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with you all tomorrow. Let's talk a little Willie Green.